Welcome to the first episode of Broken Fingers, an Elden Ring lore podcast. With me is Drew and Ce-Nex, who are Elden Ring lore aficionados. So today we'll be starting with the basics. Take us off here, Ce-Nex.
So Elden Ring is a game that came out back in 2022 to a lot of anticipation, and rightly so. It's a phenomenal game, amazing writing, amazing world design, gameplay just really fun, and it is already within 2 years one of the best-selling video games of all time. And if I recall correctly, we're 25 million units have been sold so far. So just in unit sales alone, it's a $1 billion game. In terms of the world writing and the world building, it's a collaboration effort from a renowned renowned video game developer FromSoftware, as well as legendary book writer uh, George R.R. Martin. And from what we've been told through interviews with Miyazaki, the president of FromSoftware, as well as the game director of Elden Ring, George R. R. Martin created the overall lore, as in he created the cosmology and the 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 mythology of it all, basically. And then Miyazaki and his team came in and they filled it with characters and events, and they made a history out of it. Basically, in Miyazaki's own words, uh, George R. R. Martin wrote a D&D campaign. He wrote the booklet, and Miyazaki and his team made the campaign.
Yeah, I think even if you didn't hear of Elden Ring, everyone's heard of George R. R. Martin, Game of Thrones, and so on. And I think there's also been some debate around George R. R. Martin's involvement, or how much involvement he had in the making of Elden Ring. A lot of people think he doesn't have much of a hand. A lot of people think that he does. Do you guys have any opinion on that, or is it just like it doesn't matter how much involvement he
I don't know
had?
about Drew, but personally, I feel it's very significant.
Okay.
Especially when you get into the DLC itself, like you can really, and I mean really, see George R. R. Martin's influence over the whole thing.
Yeah. I think when you look at his past works, I feel like a lot of the themes and motifs he employs in all of his other works really kind of you can actually see them quite a bit through Elden Ring, and I feel like it's not a stretch to even say that even the DLC's baseline and the foundation of the DLC was something he would have collaborated with FromSoftware on like a really long time ago.
Yeah, it definitely bears a lot of his signature motifs and themes.
Okay. But why George R. R. Martin, you think? Why did Miyazaki why not any other author, or why not go in-house? Because, they didn't need George R. R. Martin's help for, Dark Souls or Sekiro or or Armored Core, right? Why specifically Elden
So
Ring?
in Miyazaki's own words, he's a huge fan. He's a massive fan of George R. R. Martin. He personally thinks that the Game of Thrones TV show, as well as the Song and Ice and Fire books, he calls them masterpieces. He said they were masterpieces, and
Even the last season?
he said, well, debatable. Everyone has their own opinion, vocal opinions on the last season of Game of Thrones. But Miyazaki, in particular, said that his two favorite books that George R. R. Martin wrote were Fever Dream and Tough Voyaging, which, incidentally, are some of Martin's older works, significantly older works from like the mid '80s.
Oh, I see. Okay. And what were those two?
I'm not sure if.
Sorry, go on. And those two books were about.
So very different books, extremely different books.
Okay.
Fever Dream is a supernatural themed book that takes place in Mississippi during the antebellum period. Just if memory serves me correctly, about 3 years before the Civil War starts in the United States of America.
Hmm.
And it's about a captain of a ship that travels up and down the Mississippi. And this captain meets a bunch of passengers led by a man named Joshua. And it's interesting to note, I should say this, that Martin states that within the book, the protagonist, the captain of the ship, he is not good looking. He's not someone, he doesn't fit the typical, the handsome hero or the young hero. He's more of an older side. He's not exactly, in shape. He's not very attractive. So it's very, unheroic hero, if you catch my drift. Like away from the classical Greek stuff that have shaped Western stories for the last 2,500 years, right?
Yeah.
And so this captain, he meets a young man by the name of Joshua, and he notes Joshua states that he's investigating murders. And as the book progresses, the captain becomes more and more suspicious of Joshua. And then Joshua reveals, oh, well, he's not just investigating murders, because these murders are actually being done by vampires. So, surprise, surprise, George R.R. Martin wrote a vampire novel.
Okay.
Basically across 5 Aprils mixed with Twilight. But so what happens is, as the book progresses, Joshua reveals that he and several of his friends who are vampire hunters, but also vampires themselves, they are now attempting to change what it means to be a vampire through alchemical means. They're sick and tired of being bloodthirsty and mortals. They just want to be normal people. So this theme of immortality as a burden, as a curse, is very central to the book.
And that's also a central theme in Elden Ring as well.
It is a very central theme in Elden Ring.
Okay.
Particularly in the shadow of the Erdtree DLC. But as eventually what happens is the vampires end up in a civil war of sorts. Joshua on one side, and then there's another powerful vampire on the other side by the name of Julian. And as Julian eventually defeats Joshua, and then they're forced to flee, and the captain loses his ship. And after the captain loses his ship, he eventually flees the Mississippi, and he goes to the north, and he helps the Union Army and the Underground Railroad during the Civil War. Years later, Joshua comes back, says, "Hey, I need your help. I think we've perfected the alchemical means of getting rid of our bloodthirst." So the captain helps them out, and they go back to the ship, they take back the ship, and eventually they defeat Julian. Now, one of the interesting things to note is both Julian and Joshua, who are the heads of the warring factions in the Vampire Civil War, they both have names that start with J, right? So family dynamics or factions with leaders that have same-sounding names is a constant theme in Elden Ring as well.
Yeah,
you have the Carrion royal family, you have the Golden lineage, you have Marika's children. Actually, fun fact, I'm not sure if many people know this or have noticed this, the 4 progenitors, if you will, or the adults of the Elden Ring, the royal families or the main families. You have Godfrey, right? Godfrey, who was Marika's first husband. You have Marika herself, who is the central character, who is the impetus for everything that's happening throughout the story. And then you have Radagon, and then you have Renala. Renala, who is the queen of the royal Carrion family, and Radagon, who is Marika's second husband, but also was Renala's first husband. So if you take the first letters of each of them, you get GRRM.
Yeah. I really hope that
Oh.
was deliberate on his part, because that's the best thing ever. If it
Yeah.
was.
Oh, I see. I didn't know that.
Yeah.
Oh, I didn't realize it, I guess.
Yeah.
That is actual. Oh, it's GRM. Okay. Huh.
Yeah.
That's crazy. What?
Everybody
It
important
is, isn't it?
like starts with like their name starts with one of those letters.
G or
Normally.
R or M. Okay, and GRRM. So he put himself into Elden Ring. Okay.
Well, we don't know that. We don't know that.
I mean, that's kind of big coincidence to be like, there's no
could have been
way.
Miyazaki. It could have been Miyazaki who made the decision to do that.
Maybe he was fanboying a bit too. Yeah.
Yeah,
True.
maybe it could have been Miyazaki fanboy.
But still, that's a cool detail.
The idea is the adults of the demigods or the divine people are Godfrey, Renala, Radagon, Marika. The first letter of each of their names spells out
Right.
GRRM.
That's pretty cool.
And that's the theme, right? All the demigods are either have names that start with a G, an R, or an M.
Okay. Huh.
So, yeah.
Before we get into the specifics of the demigods and stuff, I think, do you guys want to talk about the, I guess, cosmology, or the start of the cosmology of the Elden Ring? There's a lot to break down here. Like, what exactly, for example, is the Elden Ring? What started the universe, or in this universe? What are the gods, these outer gods that people, when playing through the game, hear about? What exactly is all that? Where is this like a completely different sort of, how some books or games have like an alternate take on Earth? Is this Earth? Is this, and things like that? Like,
I don't know about Drew, but I would definitely say it's not Earth.
Okay.
Yeah. It's got very alien characteristics for sure, I would say.
With literal aliens too.
Yeah. And I think one of the core foundations of the world is when the Elden Beast was sent down by the Greater Will, bearing the Elden Ring. And that seems to really kind of form the foundation of the world and its laws. So I think that's really kind of the start of it all. And before that, there's indications of in-game lore saying that there was something called the One Great before, but there's not much known about that in terms of what existed before the Elden Ring was sent down.
So what we know is that for sure there's this thing called the Greater Will. It's some sort of cosmological force or a god. They're called outer gods, which brings this almost Lovecraftian element to them. And there are certain elements of Lovecraft itself found within Elden Ring. So you have this extremely powerful but absent figure that's very central to this world, right? And for whatever reason, the Greater Will has chosen to take an interest in this world. And it sends down the Elden Beast, which is I don't want to say messenger, but almost like it's
like an envoy.
Enforcer.
Okay, right.
Yeah, like a herald or an envoy, something like that. And Elden Beast becomes or physically transforms itself into the Elden Ring.
Okay.
It could almost be said that the Elden Beast is its own consciousness. And the Elden Ring is this enormous magical array of gold within circles and arcs and various geometric figures that embodies the literal laws of physics that govern this planet.
Okay.
And we learn that over centuries or millennia probably, that the Elden Ring has changed. And parts of it have been taken out, parts of it have been added, parts have been edited. And because of that, the world itself has changed and is constantly changing. So how it starts off is you have the Elden Ring and the Elden Beast. And whoever becomes the vessel of the Elden Ring, they become a god. They apothesize as a god.
Okay, because you can edit the laws of reality.
Yeah,
essentially on the planet.
Exactly.
But what about the universe?
So you have No,
or
as far as we
no?
know, it doesn't affect the universe at large.
I see. Okay. So I'm getting the impression here that the greater will is sort of a take on deism, and for listeners who don't know what that is, it's like you believe in a higher power or being out there, like that created the universe maybe, or has a hand in the involvement of the universe, or the creation of the universe, or even maintenance of the universe, but it doesn't interfere. So that's kind of the greater will, I guess. And the Elden Ring is
Yeah.
sort of a power handed down to a single planet by the greater will. So does that mean, by implication, there's multiple Elden Rings out there on multiple planets? Perhaps? Or no?
Possibly, we don't know.
Okay.
Yeah, I think that's plausible for sure.
Okay.
What we do know is the Elden Ring came down. The Elden Beast came down, became the Elden Ring. And eventually, someone did find the Elden Ring, and they became a god. And they ruled over the world for a very long time. And their people, or their followers, was the most powerful race that existed at that time. And that was the dragon race, the dragons, the ancient dragons. And this god, this individual who took on the Elden Ring and became a god, they ended up marrying the most powerful dragon of all, which was Clattuc, the Dragon Lord, and the original Elden Lord. And Elden Lord refers to the consort of the god who holds the Elden Ring.
So the dragons were the original race, or the most powerful.
They were the most powerful. They ruled the world.
Okay, they ruled the world.
The dragons, yeah.
And I've seen things. Sorry, go on.
Go ahead, please.
Oh, I've seen things in the game that imply that they can shape shift into like humans or humanoid form as well.
Yes.
Okay.
Yes.
Is that to procreate with other races, or is that just like a magic power that they happen to have?
We don't know about procreation. So there's two subspecies of dragons.
Okay.
There are the ancient dragons, which are classical dragons. They're four-legged beasts with wings on the back and fire breathing. However, ancient dragons, which is a callback to Dark Souls, dragons have stone scales. They're almost like petrified, and these stone scales give them, immortality. Dragons, they'll live forever. So, and which is a theme that was central to Dark Souls 1, and the entire Dark Souls series, where dragons used to rule the world before the gods came around in the Dark Souls games.
And I think that's also like part of one of the initial orders that was under Placidusax, is that, eventually, of course, that was one of the changes the Elden Ring went through. Is I would think the Elden Ring shape was very different, of course, during Placidusax's time. It's interesting we still can encounter a lot of those ancient dragons that were a part of that prior civilization in game. I always seems to me that they were immortal, but they weren't necessarily invincible.
Yeah.
So biological immortality, but not like,
not
immune to
unkillable.
Swords.
Yeah.
Yeah. All right. And I'm assuming one of the areas in the game which players can get to, called Farumazula, was their capital, or I guess a center of their civilization for
dragons? We're not entirely sure.
Okay.
Yeah.
I have a feeling you're gonna say that a lot.
The world has. One of the things is the physical makeup of the world also changes. Like the continents and the very land itself, it changes either through the Elden Ring or through the wars. And so going back to the dragons themselves, eventually what happens is, for one reason or another, this god who this god of the dragons. It flees. It just leaves.
Just
We don't know why. We
out
don't
of
know what
nowhere.
caused it to leave, but
Okay.
it just fled.
Okay.
And Placidusax was betrayed by one of his followers by the name of Baal. And Baal was the leader of the subspecies of dragons. These dragons did not have stone scales. They did not have the immortality of the ancient dragons, nor did they have the ancient dragon's ability to wield red lightning. So these subspecies of dragons, they're not four-legged dragons like we're used to seeing. Rather, they're two-legged dragons. They're classically what we know as wyverns.
Okay.
Yeah, and these wyverns, they became known as lesser dragons or descendants of the ancient dragons. And they're the ones that are most commonly encountered throughout the games.
Yeah, from like Lake Lernia to everywhere else, essentially.
Mhm.
And you mentioned Baal, who, for the listeners to clarify, is a boss you can encounter in the DLC for Elden Ring. And Baal is so Baal is one of the two-leggeds. He looked more like at least to me, one of those other dragons, the worms, the magma worms, like the salamander-like dragons that don't look like dragons, or is that like?
Oh,
Am I off
he
here?
didn't have four legs. That's one of the things you have to take into account.
Okay.
He had a pair of wings on the front, and then he had two legs that he used to stand. So he didn't have four legs like the magma worms. So this actually ties in really nicely together. Baal betrays Placidusax,
Hmm.
and the two of them fight, and both of them are severely injured.
Oh.
Baal is a five-headed. Placidusax is a five-headed dragon. He has 5 heads,
And we meet.
and he lost one head. We don't know how, but 2 of his other heads were torn off during his fight with Baal.
And that's why they're
Baal,
both
on the other
injured.
hand,
That's crazy. Okay.
Baal, on the other hand, has both of his wings torn off by Placidusax, and his entire left leg is severed. So, and he also has significant battle scars and wounds as well. And eventually, Baal flees. Placidusax then goes to Farum Azula, and he uses his powers over time. Placidusax is so powerful he can literally control time to a certain extent, and he removes himself from the main timeline, and he goes to a place which the game describes as a place outside of time, and he meditates there, and he's waiting for his god to return. Basically, he's recuperating, he's recovering, and he's waiting for his god to return. But as part of his revenge against Baal, he has Florisax, a dragon, a female dragon, one of the ancient dragons, create a religion known as Dragon Communion. Florisax is one of those dragons that we spoke about that can take on a human form, right?
Okay.
Although it's not perfect in human form, but it's human-esque, it's humanoid. And she creates this religion in Placidusax's name known as Dragon Communion. Dragon Communion is Placidusax realized that humans have enormous potential, but they also have enormous ambition and hunger for power. And so he created a way. He and Florisax created a way where if humans devour the heart of lesser dragons, of drakes, of Baal's children, and his ilk, his family, his descendants, they can take on the power of dragons. But there's a side effect to that. The more dragon hearts you consume, you yourself in turn will become a dragon, and those dragons are the magma worms that we encounter in game.
Oh, okay. Is that what the guy in the straw hat was trying to warn us about when we encounter him on the lake? Like, that's like the side effect of eating dragon hearts. So those worms we fight, the magma worms we fight throughout the game, are former humans. Do they like retain their autonomy, like their intelligence, or do we even know that?
Well, you'll notice some of the magma worms, or actually I believe all the magma worms, they wield weapons. They wield swords.
True. So they might have, or they probably do have that. They retain their intelligence, former intelligence. Okay.
Yeah.
Huh.
Yeah. I think it's like they retain the sentience, but like they it's almost like they're this sorry copy of the dragons, basically.
Yeah.
And that they're just kind of wallowing in this form because they can't necessarily undo it.
But how is that?
If you
Sorry, go on.
If you eat enough hearts,
Mm-hmm.
your character's eyes will actually transform into dragons,
Right.
indicating the transformation has begun.
Interesting. But how is that curse or side effect a revenge exactly against Baal? Like,
Because Baal is the strongest of all dragons, so that hunger for more hearts, for more power, will eventually spur people on to hunt Baal.
oh, okay. All right, interesting.
And that's why Florsax is telling you, like, you know, Dragon Communion. If you're gonna follow this, like, you need to go to Baal.
And then we get the iconic moments where that guy is screaming Baal. Yeah. Okay.
So that's the basic rundown of dragons.
Okay.
And once their god flees, once Baal betrays Flaccidisax, and Flaccidisax himself removes himself from time to recover from his injuries, the dragon civilization basically falls apart. Their Elden Lord is, he removed himself from time, and their god, nobody knows where he is,
Right.
or they are. They have completely fled from this, either the planet or the continent, we don't know. So now there's this gaping hole of leadership, and the Elden Ring is left abandoned. So in comes what we know as Empyreans. Empyreans are beings who can apothesize as gods. And the most prominent Empyrean was a woman by the name of Marika. And Marika herself becomes through, and that's a completely another different story. That would, honestly, Marika's entire story would take probably 2 or 3 episodes of a podcast.
Sure. On the quick note
Marika,
here, on the quick note here, what makes them qualified to be Empyreans? Like, what's so special about these people that they can apothesize?
We honestly don't know.
Okay.
So we know of 4 Empyreans, aside from Marika herself. One is the Glomide Queen, who was an enemy to Marika. And she was defeated by Marika's half-brother, Malika. And the other Empyreans, 2 of them are Marika's own children, Mikkel and Melania. And then the 4th Empyrean has no relation to Marika, except for the fact that she was Radagon's, her second husband, daughter, with his first wife, Ranala.
Okay.
And her name is Rani, who is also a very important character to our main character in the game. Eventually, so Marika, she, through a series of events, becomes the new goddess. She becomes the new vessel for the Elden Ring, and she reshapes the world. And in doing so, as a symbol of her authority and what she calls her golden order, she creates this absolutely gigantic tree, mammoth-sized tree, like taller than mountains tree, and it's called the Erd Tree. It's this behemoth of a construct that just radiates golden light. It blots out the sun. It's that big and that's bright.
That's one cool detail I actually appreciated. The big tree, because like in the base game when I was playing through it for the first time, it's like during nighttime, it didn't feel like night. But then when you go to the DLC where there's no glowing Erd Tree, nighttime really feels like night. So it's like, it was pretty cool. But what?
And so now
sorry, go on, Drew.
I think it also kind of goes into, the other detail that, the greater will doesn't necessarily concern itself with, what order takes its shape or takes the shape of the Elden Ring. It's because it was ostensibly also around when Flaccidisax was the Lord, or the Elden Lord, and a consort to a different god, a consort at his time And I think the Golden Order is just another sort of manifestation of what the Greater Will might deem acceptable. Now, there's also ideas that maybe the Greater Will isn't the end all be all, or there's also the camp that thinks that, kind of like the name implies, it's really just everything. It kind of just the Greater Will just covers it all, as opposed to just being a subset of something.
Interesting.
Yeah. So all we know is, so long as the Elden is kind of in charge or it's shaping the world, the Greater Will is pretty much content. Doesn't matter who's holding the Elden Ring.
Yeah.
So once Marika gets her Golden Order going, once Malekith, her half brother that I mentioned, kills the Glomite Queen, her rival Empyrean, so one thing of note is the Glomite Queen actually has a piece of the Elden Ring, not all of it, but a piece of it, and specifically this shard, this ruin from the Elden Ring, is the piece that governs the concept of death. It is known as destined death, and the Glomite Queen and her ilk, her followers, they make war against other divinities. And they use destined death to bypass immortality and bypass godhood, basically, to kill them. So there's many theories about the Glomite Queen. I'm not going to get into that. That's another. I think Drew can concur. That's another episode in and of itself.
Yeah.
But once Marika and Malekith, they defeat the Glomite Queen, Marika takes the Rune of Death, or Destined Death, and she seals it inside of her half-brother, Malekith. So by doing this, she completely removes the concept of death from the Elden Ring. Therefore, she gives everybody alive a form of immortality.
So no one can die, no matter what.
Nobody can die. Your physical form can perish, but through her Erd tree, the gigantic tree that she made, you can just be reborn. You can be reincarnated. There is no ultimate demise.
That sounds like
and
hell.
Yeah, and that's why during her time, Erd tree burial became this huge practice.
Okay.
And it was considered this honor to be buried, and it's almost like they considered you going back to the roots of the Erd tree to be reborn again. But what shape you might take after being reborn wasn't exactly set in stone. All that was set in stone was that you're never truly going to die.
Yeah.
So, do you retain your former life, your memories? Like, is this like reincarnation, but you remember what happened after you died? Or is it just like your soul just kind of like a fact goes through the Erd tree as it's some sort of soul's factory, and just like you just come out as a new person, new being completely with no memory of your past life? Or is that like also unknown?
We don't actually know.
Okay.
Yeah, we don't know.
We don't actually know how it works. Again, there's a lot, and I can't emphasize this enough. Drew and I can't emphasize this enough. There's a lot that's left to the imagination.
To imagination, yeah.
Yep.
There's more questions than answers.
Okay. It's still fun to think about the questions though, because depending on if they remember or not, that's hell, isn't it? That's kind of hellish. Or maybe it's interesting. I feel like there's a lot of inspiration here from our real world religions. I feel like if you presented this to a Christian, perhaps it would sound like paradise. Like it's, you live forever in this great, kingdom. But if you present this to like a Hindu or a Buddhist, it's kind of like you don't want to break out of the cycle. You don't want to, ascend. It's quite interesting. I feel like there's some themes here, religious themes here.
Oh, definitely. Personally, it reminds me of Gnosticism and the demigod. And the idea that the world is a prison, right? You're constantly trapped in it, reincarnating over and over again.
Right.
So And once we later on in the series, once we really delve into America, you'll realize just how traumatic all of this is and how tragic it is for ideals, for her golden order, basically,
Mm.
and how it came to be.
I mean,
Anyways,
yeah. Oh, just as a last note on this topic before we move on, it kind of makes sense why she would remove death from the world. I mean, if you gave that kind of power to anyone, or even a kid, right? Like, you'd be like, I would want my dog to live forever. I would want my loved ones to live forever. No pain, no suffering, right? I guess kind of makes sense from a simple perspective, but I'm sure there were consequences.
Yeah, and I think another reason potentially why she might have done that is because she wanted to wield death almost as this weapon that she could use whenever she wanted. So, I mean, the fact that it was sealed with Malekith and he was, considered, all the demigods were set to be in fear of him, kind of tells me that, it was also something that he wanted to wield as a weapon to anybody who opposed the Golden Order.
So it's
So I think it
political.
was almost like this weaponization of a basic concept like death.
Interesting.
Yeah. Like, imagine if you had a monopoly on the idea, the very concept of death. Like, governments around the world would drool, right?
Right.
But America had exactly just that. Death was whatever she wanted it to be.
Okay, so the timeline so far is there's a god called the Greater Will, passes out Elden Rings to planets, or maybe just this one planet. Goes through the dragons. Now it's Marika who picks it up. She wages a war against the Glow Might Queen, wins, seals away death. What happens after that?
Well, as part of her establishing the Golden Order, Marika takes on a consort of her own Elden Lord, just like Placidusax was to the first god who held the Elden Ring.
Mm-hmm.
Marika, as the god, had her own consort, and that was the barbarian known as Horalu, who became Godfrey. And according to the lore, Godfrey became the very first demigod under Marika. And so Godfrey Godfrey was only her husband and king, but he was also her foremost general. He led Marika's armies, and he fought against all her enemies and helped her subjugate the entire lands in between, this continent, and solidify her rule. Part of that was fighting against the giants. The giants had their own god, and it was called the Fell God. And this Fell God was a flame deity. Throughout the entire series, you'll note that fire has a very strong theme,
Mm-hmm.
and there's different colors of fire.
Mm-hmm.
And the Fell God has very bright reddish fire, and it was the only thing that could burn the Erd Tree in the absence of the destined death.
Interesting.
So America decided. Ask your question. Go ahead.
No, sorry. I was just going to make the comment. That's why they went to war, to make sure that
America decided it's too big of a threat. Yeah, 100%. So America and Godfrey led they led their armies against the giants, and they genocided the giants. And unfortunately, genocide is a very common theme throughout the Elden Ring. It just constantly shows up.
Okay. So kind of going back a little bit, why the need for a consort? Is it just because the tradition, right? The dragon god had the consort, or is like the Elden Lord as a consort required to wield the Elden Ring? And also, I'm thinking to myself as a casual player, right? Why, if you have the key to reality, do you even need to wage war? Can't you just erase people or erase races? I mean, it's interesting. Like, maybe there's like limits to the Elden Ring, perhaps, that I'm getting here.
Yeah, there are limits. I think
Yeah.
Drew. What do you think?
Yeah, I think there's definitely limitations. I mean, when you say like, yeah, she definitely, in the war against anything that stood in opposition to the Earth Tree, there was definitely a lot of subjugated races. The demi-humans, the misbegotten, and I mean, I think there's limitations in terms of what they can do, but they definitely wiped out quite a lot of other cultures within the lands between. And I think in the game we're always kind of walking through a lot of those, a lot of the vestiges of those cultures. Um, and I think Godfrey was one of her main, of course, Godfrey was one of her main tools essentially to do that. And it's almost like the central theme that, Marika is really good at making use of others to further her own purposes.
Interesting. Okay.
And so, in order to go to your question about is it an Elden Lord needed, we're not 100% certain, but just based off of what we see throughout the fact that Placidusax's god had a consort, the fact that Marika has a consort, and the idea that the entire point of the game, the fingers, and as the main character told that, hey, in order to get the world back running, you need to become Marika's third consort, her new consort, right?
Mm-hmm.
And or you can go through Ronnie's quest line and become her consort, upending the entire Golden Order. So the idea of a lord, and here lord does not mean specifically a male, very, it's very agendered. Lord here is just very, it's the generic,
Right.
referring to the consort of the god, not any specific gender. But the idea of a lord seems to be very important to the what do you call it, the ring itself. And we learn later on that part of hypothesizing into a god, at least the way Marika achieved it, it requires a second person, and that person is generally considered your consort or your spouse.
Interesting. Okay.
And I don't. Also, another thing I feel like in terms of the consorts, the role they could play maybe is also just the general administration of the order. I don't know that the gods themselves, like people like Marika, necessarily were the ones that would sort of run the day to day, if you will. Like I think like with Godfrey, you see signs of his influence and of his reign in the capital, and there's these colosseums and stuff like that. So I think you could see that being there, and then we learned that later on, once Radigan took his place, that was a practice done away with, where combat blood sport that was sort of done away with. So I think it kind of points to how like the consorts are even in many ways these administrators as well.
Yeah.
So they're also really powerful.
Yeah. So like if we kind of draw a parallel with Greek mythology, you obviously in Greek mythology you have the protogenoi, right? The protogeners of the extremely powerful ancient gods, and then you had the Olympians themselves, like Zeus, Poseidon, Apollo, Artemis, their ilk.
Right.
They're the ones who are ruling the world, even though these extremely powerful individuals existed, like Erebus and Nyx and Gaia and Oranos.
Right.
But they were absent for the most part. They didn't care to rule the world. So in that way, Marika rules the world, but she's kind of or rather, the greater will is the one in charge of everything, but it's absent, much like the protogenoi. Zeus rules the world, but he doesn't actually go down into laws and tell people, okay, this is how you're going to live, tax you're going to pay, this is how our armies are going to be. No, he's just kind of there on Mount Olympus. It's the same thing with Marika. Marika's there as more of a symbolic power. She has all the power, but she doesn't wield it directly herself.
Okay.
And then so she has her consorts. She has Godfrey first, who is the one who wages all the wars, the one who helps her establish her domain and dominion. And then eventually what happens is once Godfrey defeats all of his enemies, once he defeats all of his wife's enemies, she takes his grace away. Grace is basically Marika's direct blessings. As a goddess, she blesses people with the power of the Elden Ring, with her own power. And it's explained later on, and that we can discuss that later when we talk about Godfrey and the Golden Lineage. But she has expressed reasons for taking away Godfrey's grace, and not just him, but his entire army. So she has a very specific reason that she's purposely weakening her own military by stripping away her greatest general, as well as his entire army, of her personal blessing, and then she banishes them from the continent, from the lands in between.
Okay, two things I want to bring up here. So they genocided the giants. Then she turns on her spouse and her military by taking away her blessing, her grace. And then you mentioned continent. So there are other lands or continents on the planet.
Yes.
Do we know about them? What are they called?
True.
Yeah, so I think there's a couple of we know from some of the items in the games in the game, we know a couple of countries that are maybe adjacent or at least in the same planet as the game. So there's the Land of Reeds, there's the Badlands. Those are the two more prominent ones that we do know of. And in terms of each one of them kind of have their own different cultural identity. So the Land of Reeds is characterized as this land that's in constant upheaval and civil war, and it's seems to be heavily inspired by feudal Japan based on all the items we see in game that are related to the Land of Reeds in some format. So I think that's one of the lands, and then the other one is the Badlands, which are characterized by this rugged terrain. It seems like and it seems like a very barren wasteland kind of vibe to the whole place. And it seems like the people of the Badlands are renowned for their martial prowess and warrior ethos. So, and I think the Badlands are also significant because that seems to be where Godfrey and the Tarnished, or his entire army, seems to sort of cut their teeth before Godfrey makes a return to the Lands Between. So, I think that's why also Godfrey becomes known as the Chieftain of the Badlands during his exile. Now, the timeline on that is kind of blurry. That also could have happened before when he was Horaloo, but I think either way, it still drives home the significance of the Badlands as well.
And the Elden Ring still affects the Land of Reeds, the Badlands. Just to clarify, no,
we're not 100% sure, but we believe so.
Okay, interesting.
Yeah.
Marika's powers didn't seem to have a limit to her reach, but her base is 100% in the land.
Okay.
And so she banishes Godfrey and his entire army. But the thing is, she has a purpose in doing so, and she tells Godfrey and his army why she's doing it.
Mm-hmm.
And then after Godfrey and his ilk leave, Marika marries her second husband, Radagon. Interesting thing to note, Radagon was a devout general of the Golden Order, of Marika's Golden Order, and he had fought the Carian royal family. When the Golden Order and the Carians had gone to war, Radagon was the one leading the front, whereas Godfrey led the front against the Giants, Radagon led the front against the Carians.
Oh, it was a two-front war. Okay.
Not necessarily a two-front war. We don't know the exact timeline of when they happened.
Okay.
But the two wars had different commanders.
Right. So I understand the giants because they're a threat to the Erdtree, to what the fell god of fire. Why did they fight the Carian royal family, or did they just not agree politically? I'm assuming.
The Carians refused to bow down to Marika.
Oh, okay. It's politics. All right.
It was that simple.
All right.
The Carians worship the stars and the power of stars, and they propagated what is known as sorcery, which is magic that gathered power from the stars. Whereas Marika, her faithful, they gathered power from herself and her Erdtree creation.
And that's
whereas. Fake. Yeah, so whereas sorcery incantations come from power of the stars, the incantations of Marika's of Marika's followers, they come from the Erdtree. So it
Okay.
was Marika was like, well, I'm not gonna, this is my content. You either do what I do, or I'm gonna send my armies after you. And she did. She sent Radagon after them.
Okay.
But Radagon eventually, there's a peace. They eventually forge a peace between the Golden Order and the Carian royal family. As part of that peace, Radagon marries the Queen of Caria, whose name was Renala.
Okay.
And they felt, and by all accounts, they were deeply in love.
Mm-hmm.
And they had 3 children: Radon, Rykard, and Rani. Radon was, I don't know if he was the oldest, but he's known as a lion. He was known as the lion because he really looked up to Godfrey. He greatly admired Godfrey, and Godfrey was known for his lion iconography.
Mm-hmm.
So Radon emulated that. And then the second one, or we don't know if it was the second one, but I'm just saying second one was Rykard, and the third child was Rani, daughter, who was an Empyrean, and as far as we know, the first Empyrean born post Marika, and the Glomite Queen.
Okay. And
then after Godfrey left and his army left, Marika was now husbandless. She told Radagon, basically, break up with your wife and come marry me.
Okay.
And he did. Radagon was known as Radagon of the Order because he was zealously devoted to the Golden Order.
Right.
No.
So he goes back, he breaks up with his wife. His wife, Renala, has a mental breakdown, becomes almost comatose, and he marries the goddess of his order.
Okay.
And then Radagon and Marika have 2 children that we know of, and they're Mikola and Melania. I should note, Drew and I did skip over this, is that Godfrey and Marika have 3 known children. The first was Godwyn the Golden, who was the progenitor of the Golden lineage. And then the other 2 were Morgott and Mog, the twins. Morgott and Mog were cursed at birth. We don't know why or how, but they were cursed at birth by something, and they became what are known as misbegotten. So they have all these strange horns and these appendages, and they don't look human at all. They look almost demon-esque. And it was common in America's Golden Order that the nobility who had children that were cursed and that became misbegotten, instead of being killed, they were thrown into the sewers. So Mog and Morgott were thrown into the sewers, and Marika's one child, Godwyn the Golden, the literal golden child, he became a powerful figure in Marika's empire, her theocratic empire.
This reminds me of the Greek myth of Hephaestus, where he was so ugly that Hera drew him down Mount Olympus.
Yeah, very similar. So by now, I'm sure you can, especially when it comes to Marika and her family, you're definitely seeing the George R.R. influences, right?
Yeah, for sure. I see it.
And it should be noted that their hair color was dependent on their parents. Marika's children were known for particularly Godwyn and his descendants were known for their golden hair that they inherited from his mother, Marika. And then Radagon had really bright red hair. And so his 3 children, they also inherited the bright red hair. So again, this is very a George R.R. touch, because we have the
hair colors.
What are they called again?
The Game of Thrones. Yeah, it's a big thing in the Game of Thrones books.
Yeah.
Okay, so Radagon marries Marika, and then is that where we kind of come in as the main character?
Not quite, not yet.
Not yet. Okay.
Drew can enlighten us.
I think the way I've seen the player characters stepping into the spotlight as one of the tarnished that was part of Godfrey's army. I think we're called back. I think post, of course, post shattering. So it was after America decided to shatter the Elden Ring, and of course, there's a lot there in terms of why she would have done that, and there's a lot of discussion in terms of why and what drove her to that level of anger. It would seem to do that, but leaving that aside, just doing that caused just this massive upheaval in the lands between, and we're the ones that are called back to come back and take the throne and become Elden Lord. And it seems like the guidance of grace. Every time we look at a grace site, it seems to point us towards the next destination. Towards whatever comes next for us to become the Elden Lord. And
Right.
that is Marika guiding us, through her grace and telling us, hey, you need to go here, and this is how you can start getting to me. And I think that's why our relationship as the player character to Godfrey is really interesting, because you do have to fight him at some point in the game,
Right?
And I think it's very interesting that when you do fight him, he doesn't treat you as this person playing as a lord. He doesn't treat you as this almost imposter in some ways. So I think the start of the game is really just marked by the shattering completely ravaging the world. There's war everywhere. All the demigods are fighting over the ruins of the Elden Ring that have been scattered around after it was shattered. And it's our job to kind of come and clean it up.
Yeah. So, America shatters the Elden Ring.
But why? I mean, I know Drew said it's complicated, but like,
it's very complicated. And
okay.
Again, America is the most pivotal character in the entire series.
Yeah.
And in the base game, I mean, we get the lore bombshell that Marika is Radagon, or vice versa, right? However you want to say it. So that in and of itself is a whole thing.
Right. Okay.
We later find out that they're actually the same person just by doing a specific gesture in front of America's statue in Leyndell. So just that in and of itself flips everything on its head. That American Radagon is the same person.
I never did that. The statue thing. I should do it. Yeah. But so I was gonna bring that up earlier because I know I've seen a lot of posts talk about that. But man, yeah, that's probably another deeper topic for sure. Okay.
What is known as the main impetus that led to Marika shattering was the death of her son Godwyn.
Okay.
Remember, I told you that her other children, Mog and Morgoth, the twins, were cursed.
Right.
Well, it turns out the children she had with Radagon, they were also cursed.
Okay.
Melania and Mikola. Melania was born with the influence of something known as a scarlet rot, which was literally eating her from the inside out from the day she was born.
Okay.
And then the second one, Mikola, was cursed in the form that he would forever be a child. So her one normal child, her golden child, literally Godwyn the Golden, he was murdered. And so it said that Marika, in just sheer anger, rage, and sorrow and depression, like whatever madness a parent goes through at the loss of their child, she shattered the Elden Ring. And because the Elden Ring is the physical embodiment of this world, the very continents themselves shattered and shifted. And we can see it in the landscape. How, if you go to Liurna, right? It looks like someone just took a hammer and smashed the place. And there's this crater and this lake in the middle. And then these jagged crags just jutting out of the ground. Everything looks so misshapen. Nothing looks uniform or flat or even remotely like how any normal geological or geographic location on Earth would ever look like.
Right.
It's literally a broken world.
And the person or people who killed Godwyn the Golden was Ranni, his half sister, stepsister.
Yeah.
Okay.
Yeah. So after Radagon married Marika, Marika lifted Radagon's 3 children into the status of demigod. She semi-apothesized, if you will. And interestingly enough, Ranni, as I said, was an Empyrean. So she was a potential successor to Marika,
Mm.
Marika's god, because she was an imperial. But again, this is such a completely different discussion.
Right.
But Rani, for
Yeah.
her own reasons, has Godwin murdered because she's trying to avoid walking the same path as Marika. And it's this whole conspiracy, and again, very George R.R. Martin-esque
Mhm.
conspiracy.
Mhm.
But yeah, and this shattering leads to the Elden Ring itself physically shattered, and its shards and pieces go flying across the entire continent. And the biggest shards, the main ruins, they're known as anchor ruins. They're claimed by America's children or stepchildren, the demigods, and the demigods gather their own army and start warring with each other over, over control of the Elden Ring. And then that's where we come in centuries later. We'll assume centuries later, after everything's in a stalemate and this land is war torn and ravaged, America brings back Godfrey and his army.
So basically, this is family drama.
It is literally family
A lot of
Okay.
it. Yeah.
All right. All right. Well, on that note, I think we are going to end the first episode here. I think this was a great breakdown of the basic cosmology of it all. And we'll see you guys next time on the second episode of Broken Fingers.